We're joined now by Liberal Senator Maria Kovacic and Labor MP Jerome Laxale to unpack a very busy day in national affairs. Let's start with the coronial inquest findings from the Northern Territory. Jerome, do you feel there's enough political courage in Canberra to genuinely tackle some of the structural racism, or do you think there's still perhaps a bit of a fear or reluctance of backlash after the failure of the Voice referendum?
Well, thanks for having me on, and yes, a very big day. Look, I've got full confidence in our Cabinet Minister, Senator Malarndirri McCarthy, to digest the very large coronial report today, 32 recommendations, 600 pages, and work closely with the Northern Territory Government just to improve outcomes there. What happened 6 years ago now has been widely investigated. The coroner put out a very detailed report today. And for us as a federal government, we will need to work with the Northern Territory Government to ensure that deaths in custody, particularly amongst our Indigenous population, doesn't keep on continuing to happen. It's important that she does this work, and I'll be looking forward to working with her, as with the rest of the Labor caucus, to get better outcomes in this area.
Okay, so should it be a focus?
I think it's very much the focus of the Indigenous Affairs Minister, and Malarndirri McCarthy. I think she mentioned so today on her interview with Radio National. She said she needs to work with the Northern Territory Government over this coronial inquest, and I've got full confidence that she'll do that.
Maria, you've spoken about modernising the Liberal Party. Where does that leave Indigenous policy? What kind of vision should the Coalition offer Indigenous Australians this NAIDOC week, and especially after it opposed the Voice referendum?
I think I'll reinforce the comments made by our leader, Susan Lee, and that's that, our policies are currently under review. We're taking the time to listen to Australians and actually come to that new policy development in a consultative and constructive way. But in relation to today's findings in particular, I note and agree with Jerome's comments around that being a very extensive report, 600 pages. And I think the best thing that we can actually do is take in that information and come to properly understand those recommendations from that coronial inquest. And then there'll be lessons in that for federal, state and local government layers. And I think that's the best thing that we can do given those circumstances.
And Jerome, moving on, we saw more anti-Semitic attacks over the weekend. Victorian Premier Jacinta Allen, she's announced a new anti-hate task force. Of course, there was the introduction of anti-speech laws at the end of last year. Do you think that there's any room for improvement, I guess, at the federal level? Could more be done?
Yeah, look, let me just say publicly that those attacks were horrendous, and there's absolutely no place for anti-Semitism in Australia. People live here, people move here from abroad. To stay away from this ongoing conflict and to see this attack on Friday was truly horrific. On Shabbat, families, kids inside enjoying it. Commend the Victorian Government for establishing this task force. You're right, this builds on some legislative changes we made in the last Parliament, and I'm sure if further response is required and recommended, that as a government we won't be afraid to do so. We put forward anti-doxing laws in the last Parliament they passed. We put forward these very strong anti-hate speech laws federally they passed, and I note the New South Wales Victorian governments have done similar. We as a community need to stand up against anti-Semitism, be it in our daily lives, in and about our communities, but also from a legislative approach as well. And we've done that and we'll continue to do so if we need to.
Maria, on that issue, the Coalition was very critical of the government's efforts in its moves to try and reduce anti-Semitism during the last term of Parliament. Are you concerned more broadly about the conflict in the Middle East's impact on social cohesion here in Australia and the fact that it is continuing to, fray ties?
We have to be concerned, particularly given what we saw again on Friday night. That was totally unacceptable to actually think that in Australia on a Friday night, families going out to dinner have been targeted in such a hateful way that people storm the restaurant that they're sharing a meal together purely on the basis of the faith of those people. And to think that a synagogue was targeted, attempted to be burned while people were inside it. Let's have a think about that for a moment. It is unfathomable, but it is happening. It has happened here in Australia, and we have to put a stop to it. We have to act as decisively as we can to ensure the consequences for those responsible are so clear and so forceful that that is not considered as something to be done again.
Jerome, do you think that the Prime Minister should reinstate the Special Envoy for Social Cohesion role? It was set up last year in response to some of these attacks and incidents we've been seeing, but was dismantled after the election. Do you see room for such a position again?
Look, well, we've put in Gillian Skinner as the anti-Semitism Special Envoy. She's doing a really important job. We've established the AFP Special Operation in regards to anti-Semitism, and as I've said, we've passed some very strong laws, some of Australia's strongest anti-hate speech laws. I think we've shown that we will respond accordingly to some of these just terrible attacks. And obviously, as an entire community, we have a role to play here. What Maria said just then is absolutely right. It is shocking that in Australia people have to live in this fear. And together, we need to ensure that it doesn't continue.
Maria, the coalition lost women voters, female voters and Chinese Australian voters, and that's sort of been a trend now for 2 elections in a row. We did see the opposition leader Susan Lee meeting with Chinese community leaders, I should say, today. What do you think the opposition need to do to try and win back these voters?
I think what we need to do is exactly what we're doing, is actually to listen, to actually have conversations and come to an understanding as to where we've gone wrong. I don't think that we are the ones that can actually determine the path forward. That comes from that consultation that we're currently undertaking. And that goes to leadership that is actually prepared to undertake proper learning and proper reform, and that's what Susan is doing.
And Jerome, the Prime Minister, he's off to China this week. Beijing wants to expand a free trade agreement with Australia, and they want it to include artificial intelligence, the digital economy and green energy. How do we balance, I guess, these economic opportunities in these sectors with national security concerns, particularly around critical technologies such as AI?
Look, if that does come to pass, I'm sure all our relevant agencies will have a look through it. But I guess, more trade for Australia is a good thing. And you saw our approach to international relationships over the last term, calm, measured, and always in the national interest. That saw $20 billion worth of tariffs with China removed, which is good for lobster farmers, good for winemakers, good for beef producers across the country. This is what Australians expect of their government. And I do know that Susan Lee was in Epping today. My electorate office is there. She didn't pop in for a cup of tea, but she's always welcome to come in. Last Liberal leader to visit Epping was Scott Morrison. So they're few and far between those visits in Epping, but always welcome to come in and pop in the office.
Okay, thanks for that. Maria, I just will go to you on this issue now. Artificial intelligence and the digital economy, they're areas where really values and standards do matter. Do you think that the Australian government can realistically deepen cooperation with China in these fields without compromising on issues like privacy, transparency and sovereignty?
Well, China is our most important trading partner and they're one of our neighbours, and it's important that we have a good and respectful relationship with them. And when we do come into trade agreements, we'll need to form those in a manner which both provides outcomes for us but protects Australians.
And Jerome, the Prime Minister invoked John Curtin over the weekend, calling for a foreign policy grounded in strategic reality. Do you see that as a subtle distancing from Washington, perhaps? And what do you think that means in the context of Donald Trump being back in the White House?
No, I don't see it as a distancing from Washington at all. I mean, just in the last couple of months, we've had the Prime Minister talk to President Trump 3 times. We've had the Defence Minister meet his counterpart. We had the Foreign Minister over in America last week, and we've had the Trade Minister in constant discussion with his counterpart over there. Relationship with America is strong. What the Prime Minister was saying is that Australia should chart its own course. We should be able to have our own vision in our region and abroad, and I think Australians would expect an Australian government to do that, to put our national interest at the forefront of our foreign policy positions.
Jerome, Maria, that's all we've got time for, but I appreciate you speaking with us today.
Thank you.
Returning to one of our top stories now, an